The year was 1817, and London glowed beneath the golden haze of 1,000 gas lamps. Carriages rattled through Grosvenor Square, their wheels hissing against damp cobblestones as the season's grandest ball unfolded within the glittering halls of Devonshire House. Music swelled from an orchestra half hidden behind a curtain of roses, and the air shimmered with perfume, gossip, and expectation. It was a night designed for beauty and ambition, for whispered promises beneath chandeliers, and for Lady Eleanor Whitcomb, it was meant to mark the beginning of her new life. At 22, Eleanor was the very image of grace sculpted by circumstance. She moved through the crowd with a composure learned from necessity, her ivory gown falling like quiet snow against the brilliance of jeweled gowns around her. Her mother's watchful eyes followed every step, silently urging her toward Viscount Andrew Hales, the man who would soon be her fiancé. He was kind, she reminded herself. Steady. The sort of man who inspired neither poetry nor fear, a comfort, perhaps, to a woman who had known too much of both. Yet even as she smiled and curtsied, her heart felt like a caged bird beating against the bars of duty. The Whitcomb family's fortunes had withered in the wake of her father's death. Debts whispered through the corridors of their Wiltshire estate, and the auction of horses and heirlooms had left her mother's pride in tatters. Marriage to the Viscount was not a choice, it was survival draped in lace and manners. Tonight's announcement would seal their deliverance. And so, as the first dance began, Eleanor performed her role with delicate precision, aware that every glance, every breath, was measured against the expectations of society. The ballroom was a theater of eyes. Gentlemen stood in polished clusters, their conversation masked by polite laughter, while ladies shimmered like jewels in candlelight, each one hoping to be chosen, envied, or at least remembered. Eleanor's laughter, light, practiced, joined theirs. She felt the weight of her mother's gaze, the fragile pride of a family's future resting on her smile. When the Viscount approached, his face gentle and open, she forced herself to look pleased. He bowed, offered his arm, and together they glided across the marble floor. To the watching crowd, they were perfection, youth and respectability entwined. But beneath the melody, Eleanor's thoughts drifted elsewhere, to a life she might have lived had fate not placed her within the cold machinery of inheritance and obligation. She had once loved to write poetry in secret, ink-stained fingers betraying dreams her governess scolded away. She imagined a world where a woman's worth was measured not by her dowry but by the strength of her words. It was a dangerous thought for 1817, and she dismissed it quickly, folding it away like a forbidden letter. As the final notes of the waltz faded, the master of ceremonies ascended the staircase, his voice rising above the hum of the crowd. "My lords and ladies," he began, "we are gathered this evening to witness a union of distinction." But before he could continue, a ripple of unease stirred the air. Conversations faltered. Heads turned toward the grand entrance. Through the open doorway stepped a man whose very presence bent the room around him. Tall, severe, his black coat cut in military precision, he moved with the quiet authority of one accustomed to command. His hair, dark with streaks of iron, framed a face sculpted not by vanity but by endurance. There was something almost haunting about him, as though he carried with him the echo of distant battlefields and lost years. The whisper moved through the ballroom like wind through silk, the Duke of Ravenshire. Adrian Blackthorne, the Iron Duke, hero of Salamanca, widower of the late Lady Isabella, and one of the wealthiest men in England. He had not attended a London ball in half a decade, not since tragedy drove him into self-imposed exile on his northern estate. Yet here he was, uninvited and unannounced, walking directly into the light of 100 chandeliers. Eleanor's breath caught. She had never seen him before, yet something in his bearing stirred an inexplicable unease, as though the very air between them shifted. The Viscount stiffened beside her, confusion flickering across his face. The Duke's eyes, gray as storm clouds over the Channel, found hers across the room. It was not admiration she saw there, nor desire, but something colder, more absolute. The master of ceremonies faltered, uncertain. The orchestra ceased. A silence fell so complete that the tick of the great clock above the ballroom doors sounded like thunder. Then the Duke spoke, his voice low yet cutting through the stillness with the precision of a blade. "There will be no engagement tonight," he said. "Lady Eleanor Whitcomb is already promised, to me." Gasps erupted. A dowager dropped her fan. The Viscount's face drained of color. Eleanor turned to her mother, who stood frozen, horror written across her features. The Duke withdrew a folded parchment from his coat, its wax seal bearing the unmistakable crest of the Whitcomb family. "This," he said, "was signed by the late Lord Whitcomb, in exchange for a debt settled on his behalf during the Peninsular War. It grants me the right to claim his daughter's hand in marriage." Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. Her father's debt? It could not be true. She stared at the document as if it were a phantom conjured to ruin her. Her mother's voice broke through the noise, fragile, desperate. "Your Grace, surely there must be some mistake. My husband would never." But the Duke's expression remained unyielding. "There is no mistake, madam. I merely exercise the right that has long been mine." The crowd erupted into whispers. Some called it scandalous. Others murmured that such claims, though rare, were not unheard of among the aristocracy. The law favored power, and the Duke's word weighed more than any protest could. Eleanor's heart hammered. She looked at the man who had just dismantled her future with a sentence, searching for any trace of humanity in his gaze. Instead, she found only quiet certainty. He was not gloating, nor cruel, only resolute. A man who had made a decision long before this night began. The Viscount stepped forward, trembling with outrage. "You cannot simply take her like a possession." The Duke's eyes flickered toward him, cool and dismissive. "Possession? No, my lord. Obligation." The word struck harder than any insult. Eleanor's composure wavered. The world tilted slightly, her pulse a roar in her ears. The murmuring crowd blurred, faces dissolving into a haze of curiosity and pity. All she could hear was the echo of his voice, steady, final. "I will call upon Lady Whitcomb tomorrow to discuss arrangements," he said, inclining his head briefly to her mother. "Good evening." And just like that, he turned and left, the heavy doors closing behind him with the solemnity of a verdict delivered. Eleanor stood motionless, her gloved hands trembling. Around her, the music did not resume. The Viscount muttered something, an apology, a farewell, but she scarcely heard it. She felt as though the floor had given way beneath her, and she was falling into a world she did not choose. Above the murmur of the guests, the narrator's voice would have carried softly. In the year when England rebuilt itself upon honor and debt, one woman's freedom was signed away by ink long dried. Yet even then, in the silence that followed, fate had only just begun to speak her name. Rain shrouded the northern countryside as the carriage bearing Lady Eleanor Whitcomb wound its way toward Ravenshire Manor. The journey from London had taken 2 long days through mud-slicked roads and unyielding silence. Her mother had refused to accompany her, overcome by shame and confusion, leaving Eleanor to face the Duke alone. Each turn of the wheels felt like a descent into another life, one stripped of glitter and pretense. Outside, the vast moors stretched endlessly, gray and untamed, mirroring the uncertainty that filled her heart. When the carriage halted before the manor gates, Eleanor's breath caught. Ravenshire was less a home than a fortress, its towering facade carved from dark stone, with ivy crawling like veins across its surface. The iron gates creaked open, revealing manicured gardens drowned in mist. A pair of footmen waited, their expressions trained to obedience, yet their eyes betrayed a flicker of curiosity. The Duke's household had long been accustomed to silence and rumor. Now a young lady, unannounced and unwanted, had arrived to disturb their master's solitude. Inside, the halls were vast and dimly lit, filled with ancestral portraits whose painted eyes seemed to follow her. The air carried the faint scent of cedar and something older, like the memory of smoke. When she was led into the drawing-room, she found the Duke standing before a roaring fire. His black attire was immaculate, yet his posture betrayed fatigue, as though every inch of him bore invisible armor. He turned as she entered, and for a moment, the world contracted to the space between them. "Lady Eleanor," he said, his tone measured. "You must be weary." She curtsied, forcing calm into her trembling voice. "I am, Your Grace. Though I confess weariness is the least of my concerns." A faint shadow of a smile touched his mouth, not in amusement but acknowledgment. "I expected nothing less of you." He gestured to the chair opposite. "Please, sit." She remained standing. "Why have you done this? You have humiliated me before all of London." My father may have owed you a debt, but he is gone. That contract, whatever it was, should have died with him. The Duke studied her, his gaze sharp yet not cruel. You speak as though I sought to shame you. I did not. Then what did you seek? He hesitated before answering. To protect what is mine to protect. Am I an object now? She demanded, her composure cracking. A debt to be claimed? His expression hardened. You are not an object. But neither am I a man who breaks his word. Your father came to me during the war, desperate, ruined. I saved his lands from seizure, and in return, he pledged your hand when you came of age. It was not an agreement I ever intended to enforce until— He stopped, the sentence dissolving into silence. Until what? Until certain men began to circle you, he said quietly. Men whose intentions were far from honorable. Eleanor blinked, confusion slicing through her anger. You speak in riddles, Your Grace. There are forces in London that use marriage as a weapon, he continued. One in particular, a marquis with influence and appetite, sought to claim you by deceit. When I learned of it, I intervened the only way the law would allow. His words struck her like cold water. She wanted to reject them, to accuse him of fabrication, yet something in his voice, its quiet conviction, left no room for doubt. Still, his reasoning did little to soothe her resentment. And in saving me, she said, you have imprisoned me. He turned away, facing the fire. You may see it that way. I see it as restitution. Silence fell. The flames threw restless light across the room, painting his face in hues of amber and shadow. She saw now that his eyes, though stern, held fatigue deeper than pride could conceal. There were stories buried there, losses unnamed, regrets unspoken. I do not wish to remain here, she said finally. That is not my wish either, he replied. But until the terms of your father's debt are resolved, you are under my guardianship. Not my prisoner, Lady Eleanor, my ward. The word tasted bitter. A ward was little more than property in the eyes of the law, no matter the civility that wrapped it. Yet she bit back her retort, knowing defiance would yield nothing now. Very well, she said. But I will not be silent. I will write to Parliament. I will challenge this claim. His gaze flickered with something, admiration perhaps, but he said only, do as you must. That night, in her assigned chamber overlooking the rain-swept moors, Eleanor could not sleep. The wind battered the windows like restless ghosts, and the manor groaned with age. She thought of the Duke's words, his strange mixture of command and restraint. Who was this man who had shaped her fate with such finality yet spoke as if haunted by it? Days passed in uneasy rhythm. The Duke spent his mornings in his study, managing estates and correspondence. She dined alone, her only company the occasional servant or distant echo of a piano being played somewhere below. The loneliness should have been unbearable, yet curiosity kept her awake at night. In the stillness of the corridors, she began to see fragments of the man behind the title, the way he paused before a portrait of a young woman each evening, the soft command in his voice when addressing his servants, the quiet grief in his posture when he thought himself unobserved. It was the portrait that finally stirred her courage. One afternoon, she lingered before it, a beautiful woman in white silk, her expression tender and knowing. The resemblance between the painted eyes and the Duke's was unmistakable. She was my wife, came his voice behind her. Eleanor turned, startled. He stood in the doorway, his face unreadable. Lady Isabella. She died 5 years ago. Eleanor lowered her gaze. I am sorry, Your Grace. He nodded once. Her death taught me the cost of trust. It is not something I give easily anymore. And yet you expect me to trust you? I expect nothing, he said. Only patience. The truth of my actions will become clear in time. His restraint unsettled her more than anger would have. She wanted to despise him, yet found herself studying the quiet ache that lingered behind his control. Each conversation left her more uncertain. Was he her captor or her protector, her enemy or her mirror? That evening, she took a walk along the terrace after supper, the air sharp with rain. She thought she was alone until she saw him at the far end, staring into the mist. He turned as she approached, his expression softened by the lamplight. "You are not what I expected," she said. "Nor are you," he replied. "I thought you a frightened girl. But you fight like someone who knows her worth." "Then let me prove it," she said. "Release me." He looked at her for a long moment. "Freedom," he murmured, "is rarely given. It is taken, and it costs more than you think." Their eyes met, the air charged with something unspoken, fragile, and dangerous. For a fleeting second, the distance between them dissolved, replaced by an understanding neither dared name. Then he stepped back, retreating once more into the armor of duty. "Good night, Lady Eleanor." As he disappeared into the shadows, she stood beneath the moor's restless wind, her pulse unsteady. She had come to Ravenshire expecting imprisonment, yet she sensed something else entirely taking shape, a battle not between captor and captive, but between two wounded souls learning the cost of power and the peril of compassion. And though she did not yet know it, this uneasy beginning was the first thread of something that would change them both forever. Spring returned to England with hesitant grace, washing the moors around Ravenshire in pale sunlight and ghostly mist. Yet inside the manor, the days unfolded with a fragile rhythm that neither Eleanor nor the Duke seemed willing to disturb. They had fallen into a quiet pattern of avoidance. Morning walks taken at separate hours, meals shared in silence, conversations that began with civility and ended in retreat. Still, beneath that restraint lingered something volatile, a current of understanding neither could extinguish. The bitterness that had marked her arrival had softened into wary curiosity, and with it came the dangerous comfort of familiarity. Eleanor's petition to Parliament had been sent weeks ago, its pages written in careful, resolute ink. She expected no answer. Women's voices, however eloquent, rarely reached the ears of men who governed them. Yet writing it had changed her. The act itself was defiance, a declaration that she would not be silent within the walls of another man's world. The Duke had said nothing of it, though she was certain he knew. His respect for her rebellion unsettled her more than his authority ever had. One morning, while exploring the manor's library, she found him already there, seated near the window with a stack of documents. He looked up when she entered, and for the first time, he smiled without reservation. "You rise early," he said. "Sleep is fickle," she replied, tracing a finger along the spines of the books. "Your house is not kind to dreams." "Nor to dreamers," he murmured. "That is why I keep it." There was a melancholy in his tone she could no longer ignore. She turned toward him. "You speak as if you despise comfort." "I distrust it," he said simply. "It dulls the conscience." She studied him in the soft morning light. The proud war hero, the feared Lord of Parliament, here he looked almost human, his eyes shadowed with remembrance. "Is that what this is, then?" she asked softly. "Your conscience." His gaze lifted to hers, sharp and searching. "You think me cruel." "I think you wounded," she said. "And like all wounded men, you mistake control for strength." Something flickered in his expression. Pain, perhaps, or recognition. "You are very bold for someone who believes herself imprisoned." "Boldness is all I have left." Their eyes held until the sound of rain on glass broke the moment. He rose and approached her, his movements deliberate, his presence disarmingly calm. "You will leave Ravenshire when I am certain it is safe for you to do so," he said quietly. "There are matters in London, rumors, that could destroy you if you return now." "What rumors?" "That your father's debt was not simply a financial failing," he replied. "Certain men wish to discredit your family, to take what remains of your name. My intervention has made me a target as well." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Then why protect me at all?" His answer came without hesitation. "Because I once failed to protect someone I loved." It was the first time he had spoken of his late wife with such naked honesty. Eleanor's breath caught, her anger dissolving into something far more dangerous, understanding. "And now you think saving me will absolve you," she said softly. "No," he replied. "It will not absolve me. But it might allow me to begin again." Their silence was thick with everything unspoken. When she finally turned away, Her pulse trembled with confusion. She had come to despise the Duke's control, yet now she saw that his authority was a veil for grief. The line between obligation and affection had blurred, and she no longer knew on which side her heart stood. Days later, a letter arrived bearing the seal of the Home Office. It summoned the Duke to London immediately regarding matters of state and reputation. Eleanor watched him read it, his jaw tightening, his composure unraveling in the smallest of gestures. "You are leaving," she said, though it was not a question. "I must," he replied. "It concerns both of us. There are accusations, false ones, that my late wife did not die naturally." Her voice faltered. "They cannot believe that." "Belief is irrelevant when power is involved," he said. "But I will not let this stain touch you." Before he departed, he pressed a sealed envelope into her hand. "If I do not return, this will free you from every claim I hold." She stared at it, stunned. "You would relinquish everything?" He met her gaze steadily. "You are not mine to keep, Eleanor. I said those words once in arrogance, but I will not live them in truth." After he left, Ravenshire grew unbearably still. Days stretched like empty corridors, each one echoing his absence. She walked the moors restlessly, thinking of the man who had begun as her captor and become, against her will, the measure of her heart's defiance. The letter he had given her remained unopened in her drawer, a promise of freedom she could not yet bring herself to claim. When word finally came from London, it was not from the Duke but from a newspaper. The scandal had erupted publicly. Whispers of murder, of mercy, of a nobleman who defied both church and crown to ease his dying wife's suffering. The tale was distorted, cruelly embellished. Eleanor's name appeared beside his, her connection to him twisted into accusation. She could have remained silent. Instead, she ordered a carriage to London. Against the counsel of everyone at Ravenshire, she traveled through rain and mud, her resolve hardening with every mile. If she had learned anything in her confinement, it was that silence protected nothing. At the hearing, the hall was packed with peers and spectators hungry for spectacle. The Duke stood before them, impassive, while his accusers recited their charges. When Eleanor entered, murmurs rippled through the room. She walked past them all, straight to the dais, her gown damp from the journey, her composure unbroken. "My lords," she said, her voice clear, "if you would know the measure of this man, you should know also the truth of his mercy." She spoke then of what he had confessed to her, how his wife had been dying of fever, begging for release, and how his decision had been one of compassion, not cruelty. Her words were simple, unsparing, and devastating. When she finished, there was no applause, only silence, a silence that cut deeper than any verdict. That night, the inquiry was dismissed. The Duke's name was cleared, but Eleanor's reputation lay in ruins. The whispers that once pursued him now clung to her. Yet when he found her afterward in the empty corridor, his expression held no triumph, only gratitude. "You've given up everything," he said. "I have given up nothing that mattered," she replied. "Freedom without truth is only another kind of cage." He looked at her for a long moment, then offered his hand, not as command, but as invitation. "Then let us build something honest from the wreckage." Years later, they would live quietly at Ravenshire, far from the noise of London. The world would forget their scandal but remember their kindness. Eleanor would write under a false name, her essays on education and equality passing through salons and drawing rooms like sparks of quiet rebellion. The Duke, older now, would tend the land and watch her work, content to remain the shadow behind her light. On a spring morning much like the one of her arrival, Eleanor stood at the window of Ravenshire, the moors alive with bloom. The world beyond still belonged to titles and power, but within these walls, she had found something purer than freedom, choice. And as sunlight spilled across the stone floors, the echo of his voice, once so commanding, came to rest in her memory as a vow remade. "She is not mine. She is herself."